Heritage Conference, and they had given me the title of the lecture, and I didn't really know what it was. I knew what I wanted to do, but they gave me this title, History of Dixie Highway. And then I didn't know it till I got there, so I immediately told them in front of everybody, I'm not going to do that. And the reason was, this is Dixie Highway. It goes from Mackinac, Sault Ste. Marie to Miami. And if you notice it, it's not one road. The things that call themselves Dixie Highway is a whole collection. Well, to do that would take like 2 weeks to do a lecture. So I said, I can't do that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pick it up the Dixie Corridor. And just as Bob said, from Pontiac up to I'll go all the way to the Genesee line. And kind of talk about the evolution of that road, because you guys are right in the middle of that. So that's what I'll do. So I tentatively called it The History of the Oakland County Dixie Corridor. And then I said, that is boring. So I don't like that. Because I'm a historian, and I really don't find the history of a road very fascinating. It's a road. It was dirt and then gravel, then paved. But I said, here's what's interesting. The people and the places and the events that happened along the road. So the new improved title is A Fiddler, a Horse Farm, and a Harvest Device. That's people, places, and events along the Dixie Corridor. And I'm actually going to start right in your area. I'm going to start right here in Groveland Township with William H. Greene. William H. Greene came and settled right there, his family, right along what was then the Saginaw Turnpike. It had been a Native American trail, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but it had come right up through their land. It came in 1851 in a wagon, real pioneer style, and they built, right there they built a frame house, which is supposedly one of the first frame houses in Groveland Township. And then he married the girl next door, because you did that. That was Martha Hankinson, and there weren't a lot of choices, so a whole lot of people married the girl next door. And that's what he did. He married Martha Hankinson, and then he became kind of famous in Genesee and in northern Oakland because he had a threshing machine. They were big and they were expensive, and not many had them. He was a thresher, and he would rent himself and the thresher out during harvest season. But if you ask William H. Greene what his claim to fame was, he'd tell you he was a fiddler. He was the town fiddler for Austin Corners, or Austin, and that's right where Oak Hill comes out. So he always said he was a fiddler for 45 years. So he's kind of my fiddler, and what's good about starting with him is that he's a human being. But here's what I found the most interesting. That little house you saw, William H. Greene lived in that house all 80 years of his life. The same house. And imagine, he was right on Dixie Highway. When he was interviewed in 1931, just 6 months before he died, he said he loved watching the traffic change. He said in his lifetime, he had watched it change from Indians to tourists and from stagecoaches to motor cars. He saw the whole history there. He talks about Native Americans living in the area, not just passing through, who would come and pay his mother 50 cents to pick currants on their farm because they had a lot of currants in the area. So I thought he was a great starting point for me, because in his lifetime he saw all of the change. So we're going to start with William H. Greene, but then we're going to back up in time. Before William H. Greene and his family were here, the Saginaw Trail was here, and it ran from Detroit up to the Saginaw Valley. It's probably 600 years old. It began with the Sauk Native Americans. Way before Detroit, the place that would become Detroit was a Native American settlement. And the main trade was between the Saginaw Valley, which was a huge Ojibwe area, and the Detroit area, which was Potawatomi, Odawa, and Ojibwe. So people had been moving up along the Saginaw Trail. Now the Saginaw Trail was just a rough path, and it followed the path of least resistance. So it wasn't straight like Dixie Highway became. But interestingly enough, in 1817, when they began to survey Oakland County, the surveyors recognized it. They marked it as a dotted line, and sometimes they actually spelled out Saginaw Trail, all with A's, 3 A's. In their journals, they mentioned the Saginaw Trail, so they fully knew it was there. Sometimes they just called it an Indian path. You'll see it on the Groveland survey. This happens to be Waterford, and it would be run right through. And again, path of least resistance, because when it came to a swamp, what do we do now? We fill in the swamp and we go across. Native Americans went around the swamp. When you wanted to cross the river, you found either the shallowest or the narrowest spot. So it's a wiggle-woggly line. Dixie Highway follows it as close as it can, but in many cases it's a straight line, and the trail would have been off to the side. The next place we always look for history of an area is a 1931 book. It's an archaeological atlas of Michigan. And this archaeologist took all the existing evidence of Native American archaeology that had been discovered from pioneer records, from museums. And this is our little part. Here's the Saginaw Trail. He found some interesting things along the trail. Right here was a Native American village, kind of near south of Narren Lake and Bald Eagle Lake, a significant settlement. Right here at Williams Lake, one at Mesa Lake, and the biggest area right here in Groveland were Native American mounds. They look like this. They were burial mounds. They were buried with a lot of artifacts in them. So some of the most significant ones in Michigan were in Groveland. Now where are they now? They got flattened because farmers found they were in the way. And sadly at that time, farmers didn't realize the significance. They found bones in them, didn't know what that they belonged to, and a lot of them were just leveled. But I'd like to find out more about your mounds because it was a significant collection. Now, the archaeologist also said this area, your area of Oakland County, because of its many lakes, was a situation, was perfect for ideal for Indian life. A path led to every lake because Native Americans used water. Early writers state that Indian cornfields and sugar camps existed in many parts of the area. So as white settlers came in, these old cornfields were still there. The sugar camps were still there, ones that had looked like that. So people were not only traveling along the trail, they were living along the trail in your area. Now we know that will change. As pioneers came in, Native Americans were displaced. Now we go to what I call the tavern towns. These won't have a mill and a river. They're going to start as a hotel, as a little tavern. And why? Because in 1826, the government decided to build a government road between Detroit and Saginaw. And it followed the old Saginaw Trail. By 1833, it was to Flint. Now it was an earthen road, but it was able for a stagecoach to get down. And now stages would run from Detroit to Flint, from Flint to Saginaw. And stagecoaches needed stopping spots because it took a day to get from Detroit up into Oakland County. So what we get is stagecoaches need taverns. Now what were these luxury hotels like? Crude and inadequate, but food was abundant and friendliness was the rule. And that's what they were like. These were hometown wilderness little taverns. Usually someone built a house and had people staying just in a section of their house. Right here in Springfield would be an example. Asahel Fuller in 1831 built a house and then stayed in just a tiny part of it and used the rest for an inn. And then in what I call one of the early examples of hotel competition, Giles Bishop will literally build right next door 2 years later and they'll compete with each other over time. And that'll be it, 2 hotels. Well then people said, well maybe that's a good place to settle, and Springfield, the community, will grow around the hotels. You know, normally the town comes first, then the hotel comes, or Mill Town Hotel. But here along this area, hotels were first, the little taverns, and then the communities would grow. Springfield, by the 1860s, boasted 2 merchants, and they were related, the Merrill, a Maryland son. They had a physician and a surgeon, Dr. Bartlett. The big 2-story white building on Dixie Highway in Springfield, Dr. Bartlett's office is still there. That big building exists. And then it had a hotel keeper, it had 2 blacksmiths, and it had what I found as a maker of stoneware. And I said, what was that? What was a maker of stoneware? So I researched Mr. Harrington. He was a potter. He was one of the few potters in Oakland County, particularly in the north. His specialty was jugs and crocks, it said. So his pottery was going all the way over in Oakland County. Now, these folks were not the claim to fame of Springfield, though. It would become known because of that farm, the Ellis Farm. It will become known throughout Michigan because the farm is literally in town. I mean, the house was right there and the farm was behind it. Norman Ellis had come in the 1870s and purchased, there was already a house on the land, and he was interested in stock breeding. And he started with sheep. And there were a lot of sheep farmers in our area of Oakland County. And then he made a change. This is him and his wife. He decided to go into horses, and he picked Percherons. And I'm not a horse person, but I've learned these are big draft horses. And there were very few in Oakland County, and people wanted them because we had rocky, heavy soil in many places, and these guys could pull plows through it. Our roads were crummy, and they could get our wagons down the road. So he did hugely successful with these horses, particularly with the first one he bought. He bought Ingomar. Ingomar came from France. He actually ordered it from France. He literally took all the pennies the family had to buy Ingomar, but it was a very good business decision because Ingomar was, excuse my language, a super stud. He was amazing, and that's what they used him for stud services. They made so much money on just Ingomar that they were able to build the Ellis Barn. This fabulous, it was one of the biggest barns in Michigan.
Ingomar's name is up.
Ingomar's name was Ingomar's Farm. They even were able to build this Italianate house, which was huge. So it was successful. Now, after a while, though, as our roads improved and as we got mechanical tractors, Percherons weren't needed anymore. So they switched to these kind of Tennessee walkers, ones used for dressage and for jumping, and that became their specialty. The Dixie Saddle Club, which started in the 1940s for 25 years, would have all their events at the Ellis Farm. Now, the Ellis family sold to two baseball players, Tim Versus and Gibson. And when they bought the land, they agreed to let the Oakland County Parks have the barn, and it was dismantled by a group of Amish barnrights from Indiana, taken apart piece by piece, and it was reconstructed at Springfield Oaks. So our barn is still over there. And it was a huge house. So now we're going to go way up there, Stony Run. I had never heard of Stony Run. So I said, I'm going to have to do some serious research here since I don't even know that community exists. But how did it start? It was near the Genesee border, right on Saginaw Turnpike. Smith, Jenks, and Thomas Irish, they built a hotel. There wasn't one in the north yet. They built a little tavern in 1834, just 3 years after Springfield gets started. And then it becomes a stagecoach stop. Very early on, here's the actual cheap and rapid riding. Mr. Petty and Mr. Ross were in charge of the stagecoach run between Flint and Pontiac. And then you can see Groveland is listed on there too. We'll get to you in a minute. But Stony Run becomes a spot. Now notice it says you could leave leave Flint in the morning, and this was so rapid that you could make it to Pontiac to catch the train to Detroit. The stagecoaches had stopped running now between Pontiac and Detroit because the train was more efficient. So you took the stage to Pontiac from Flint, then you got on the train. So if you were lucky, you could, on the morning, get on Flint, and by 6 o'clock at night, you'd be in Pontiac. Now, it might have been cheap, but I can't call that rapid. I just can't call that rapid travel between Flint and Pontiac. I mean, think what we can do that in now on I-75. But at that time, because the road was so rough, that was considered a great way to travel. So here it is on the map. Why did it get its name? Vast quantities of loose stone and boulders. And that just plagued farmers, it has throughout this area forever. But later on would be huge business because of the Groveland area. Now that's turned into a new economic activity. And now, come to Groveland. What was your start? Philip McComber built a large log house and used it as an inn. It becomes known as Groveland Cottage. You'll even see on the map, it's labeled Groveland Cottage. Now, why a log hotel was called a cottage, I don't know. I haven't solved that one yet. But it was very famous. It's listed in lots of things as Groveland Cottage. You'll see on the map, it had blacksmith shops, It had the hotel, there were little businesses there. But here it is now. There's just very, very little there. That was right where the hotel was, Groveland Cottage. And then we have one more. We got Austin's Corners. That was the last little one. That was 1837. And that's at Oak Hill. That's right on the border of Groveland and Springfield. This began again. Thomas Twilliger built a hotel at the corners, named it after himself. And then it becomes both Austin Corners and Austin. Now the name comes from David and Horatio Wright. And there's two stories in history. One is that they named it after their mother, whose maiden name was Austin. The other one is that David Austin Wright named it after himself. So it's hard to tell in history, but it becomes Austin Corners or Austin Post Office. The Twilliger house is still there, Twilliger's house, and right next to it is a fabulous house, the Horatio Wright House, which is being lovingly restored by Mr. Sash back here. That is a fantastic house. They're doing an amazing job on that house. So we have two significant structures at Austin that are still there, two houses that are still there. Now what happened to Twilliger's Tavern? Well, notice this name, Mr. Petty bought it. He was the one who was running the stage between Flint and Pontiac. He needed a halfway point to have a horse changing, because they besides stopping for people along the way, you had to have a halfway point where you switched horses in those days. So Austin Corners began as a horse switching place at that time. Now there's not much left there at Austin Corners besides the two houses and the school, but right at the corners the blacksmith is gone, the hotel is gone, you've got the township sign. And again, here's at Oak Hill, there's very little evidence. But what happens? The stories remain. And my favorite one, of course, takes us back where we begin. William H. Green, who was the fiddler at Austin Corners. So I kind of started my research, and then as I went chronologically, I ended right back with William H. Green. So what we had was someone who saw, just like I talked about, from Indians, and then to tourists, and from stagecoaches to motor cars. So we had a fiddler, and a horse farm, and a harvest of ice.
Thank you.